So before we get started, a couple of things we need to do. We'd like to thank McCready Interiors and Norwalk the Furniture Idea for so generously shipping all this furniture over to us so that we could have a nice setting for you tonight for tonight's panel discussion. So thank you guys very much. And I'd also like to introduce our panel, some of whom you're going to recognize from the film, some of whom you might not. Left to my left, David Messmore, retired lieutenant at Mansfield PD. George and Susan Ziegler, Collier's folks. I think you know the guy to George's left, Collier Landry. Two-time Academy Award-winning director, Barbara Koppel. Fantastic producer, Ray Novoselsky. Retired editor-in-chief and a mentor to journalists in Mansfield for the last 40 years, Tom Brennan. And Dr. Dennis Marikas. So I have some questions. I'm going to start with you, Collier. Why take this horrible experience and make it a film? What was the goal?
Guess I should have asked to have these questions before, like you offered. No. Well, I mean, the original impetus was, I wanted to heal myself, and I always wanted to do something positive with this tragedy. And in doing that, I kind of started formulating plans. I mean, I moved out to Hollywood probably 16 years ago, and I always had this, I was like, I have to do something with this. And the original impetus was, okay, I met a producer named John Morrissey who made a film called American History X, which was very influential to me because it really examined the consequences of violence. And I thought, this guy gets it. Flash forward about 10 years later, I meet him. I say, hey, I got this idea for a project. I want to do a pilot for a television series about the effects and consequences of violence on communities, on secondary victims, on trauma and non-combat PTSD. And I think this is really cool. We've met, and the best thing is I own the pilot because we'll just do it about my life and my people. And he goes, well, I have a director that I think would be interested in this. And it was Barbara Koppel. So it originally was started out as a project that was designed to really give me some healing and catharsis, evolved into something that I was like, okay, this is greater than myself, this is affecting my community, and it goes well beyond the walls of this community. It goes out to the rest of the world that has had to deal with very traumatic and very violent situations. And if I could just be that one little ray of hope, then I might be able to make a difference, at least maybe to one person. And that really was the driving impetus to be where we are today.
Question for all three of the filmmakers. I was struck watching the film the first time in Cleveland and again tonight that Mansfield, the city, seems to almost be a character in the film and definitely feels like a protagonist in Collier's life and in the narrative of the film. Was that something that evolved organically as you begin to tell the story, or did you sort of know that going in as you were making the film?
No. As a filmmaker, particularly doing documentaries, you never plan anything. You can research, you can think about things, but then real life happens, and you follow real life. It just so happened that we were filming this in a couple of weeks before Christmas, and it was snowing, and it was hard, and it was frozen, and it was almost for us having it be frozen in time. But I just want to also say that this community is so incredible. You guys have given so much love and so much of yourselves. I mean, sitting on this panel with all of these people who have opened up their lives and opened up their hearts and really talked about very, very difficult things is why, for me, it's so worth it to be a filmmaker. And I just want to say I'm terribly blessed to feel like I'm a small part of this community and be part of this filming.
So this question's for Ray. Ray, I'm curious about your take on this. As documentary filmmakers, you guys came to Mansfield and you asked people to sort of peel back emotional scar tissue that had been there for, had grown over the course of 26 years. Exposing really raw feelings about a very difficult and tragic time. What did you observe about the people that you talked to as you asked them to do this? How did they react to you making that ask in terms of, can we talk about something that is really, really hard to talk about? How did your subjects react?
It's a really interesting question.
Thank you.
Well, I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I was maybe 3 years younger than Collier. So when we were prepping to come out to Mansfield, we were watching the trial footage of him testifying, and I saw a lot of myself, up there, and I felt like I had an idea of what Mansfield might be. When we came, that was the first time I got to actually meet Collier in person. And it was interesting to see the guy that I recognized, the little boy with those really identifiable eyes, walk into that room. And he could have been, he could have turned out a lot differently. And it was kind of amazing to meet the real guy. And so we got, I got lucky really 5 years ago and ended up on Barbara's team, and I got kind of a complete master class in how one does documentary. And Barbara really means it when she says that she doesn't set out to make any particular story. It's completely set on what subject she's following. And so in this case, it was Collier doing the asking for people to open up. And we were just sort of there, fly on the wall, following that. And so, in terms of the reactions, once I knew Collier, I feel like a lot of people want to say yes to Collier when they meet him, and I feel like a lot of people want to hug Collier.
I have that same feeling, Ray.
Yeah, they want to hug Collier, and they want to, he's very huggable, exactly. So that's my answer.
Yeah, can I add to that a little bit? Collier was absolutely amazing, and there was nothing he didn't want to do. He really wanted to get this story out. And for me, I've done films before, Running from Crazy, which is about the Hemingways' mental illness and suicide, and also a film called Shelter about homeless vets. And my good friend Dave Morris, who sang also in Harlan County and has passed away, he and his son Jack, who is here with us tonight, went there and sang songs and talked to different veterans. And David was a Vietnam vet. So I've been in situations where people just really pour out their hearts to each other. But I think one of the most chilling things for me was doing a one-on-one interview with your dad and asking him questions about his life. And when I went to shake his hand, I just got a chill that went through my body talking to him. And this was just a very incredible, very heavy experience for me, but one I'm so glad that I was able to participate in.
Thank you. So this, for George and Susan, when you created a new home for Collier in the midst of this tragedy, I mean, you did just an amazingly loving thing. It astonishes me, it just, as a parent, just to open your home to Collier was just an amazingly loving thing to do. How did the two of you, though, cope with the challenges of integrating him into a new life, and while you kept him in the community, he moved from one neighborhood to another, he went to a different school system. How did you guys cope with those challenges as parents?
You're going to give it to me.
Here comes the straight shooter.
Well, it took us a couple days to get him acquainted with us. The first day that he came in the house, he pulled me aside and said, George, because we knew each other from Discovery School and things like that, he says, I want you to talk to the judge and tell the judge you don't want me, you want me to give him to Dave Messmore. And I told him, Collier, I can't do that. The judge said this is where you're going to live. And we began to have an agreement from there on out that we would try to be as straight with each other as possible. Collier and I had lots of weekend mornings because he and I both got up earlier than Levi and Susan. And we had different breakfasts together, a lot of talks, things like that. But we had a lot of problems with we had the children's services, we had the therapy that had to take place with both Collier and family therapy, and we had problems with the school because Collier wore a button with his mother on it. And the school was really pissed off about it. So we ended up leaving the school and had to go to Ontario, and there was a special meeting that Collier was coming to the school and things like that. So, and everybody in the community was very open to Collier. They seen him on the TV, they knew who he was, and we didn't know who he knew. And it was very uncomfortable at times when Collier would talk to people just like he does all the time. And then we'd say, well, Collier, who was that? Because we were trying to be nice, sit back and let him communicate with friends and family. He said, I haven't a clue, George. And that's when we had to start pulling back a little bit out of going out to protect Collier, not to prevent the community from seeing him, it's just that it became very uncomfortable that some people would just point and stare, and other ones would actually be bold enough to come up and start talking to him. And we had those different issues, and then we had, then Collier came into a family that had, my brothers and sisters, we have 10 kids in our family, and right now I think we got 46 cousins, and there's up to about 90 something like now, but he had to meet those people and go from there. But Susan knows more too, so.
I know lots. I really enjoyed when Collier said that I got him into singing, so I thought that was really nice. I don't really remember that, but I think that was wonderful. I think they can hear me. We brought an only child into our family. We had an only child, and now we had two only children because Collier was older, and they told us that bringing an older child into your home, there could be problems. And they were both treated like firstborns. And I don't know.
Well, they had a lot of competition as being firstborns, and and each of them wanted the attention of both of us individually, and there was only 3 years difference, and at times that was trying, but we worked through it. When we applied for Collier, we had a family meeting with Levi and Susan and I, and sit down, and we said that we just can't stand by and let him lose everything. So no matter what was going to happen, we were going to put him for at least 6 years. But right now it's been 29, and he still keeps coming back.
Seems like we're doing okay. So Dave, this next question is for you. Thinking back to January 1990, in a recent interview that you did with us, you mentioned that there was initially sort of a lack of interest in the Mansfield PD in investigating or pursuing an investigation of Dr. Boyle, and that you really sort of had to bird dog that yourself. Can you tell us when you knew, like, when was it that you really knew that you were on to something and that Noreen was not missing?
Well, when I came to work on January 1st, we had a number of reports that were in need of follow-up. So I assigned them all to the detectives who were working in the major crimes. And the one issue was a missing person, which is not completely out of the realm, but it wasn't as pressing as some of the really serious crimes we had. And one detective followed it up for a while, and he said there wasn't any indication of where she went or that sort of thing. So I said, well, rather than let it lay, I'll take it and work on it for a while. And when I went to the house the first time, Collier and his grandmother were there, which is Dr. Boyle's mother, which was unusual for her to even be there. But when I walked into the house and started talking, she was a little dismissive. And Collier, in his own little way, he kind of sidled up to me and he started whispering about what happened. And he said, my mother would never leave me and go away without telling me what was going on. So then he'd walk away, and I'd walk through the house and talk to his grandmother a little more. And then when I get off to my side, here he'd come again. And he'd have something else to say, that this is not right. My mother would never do this. And, you know, you can see how he is now. He was just as convincing at 11 years old. And he was very sincere about what he said. And normally, if you talk to 10, 11-year-olds, you kind of take part of what they say as being really accurate. But in his case, he was so convincing that I thought, I'm going to have to look into this some more. And when I came back to talk to him again that day, his grandmother pretty much threw me out of the house. She said, don't come back here and bother me again. And I said, okay. So I waited for a while until I thought the doctor might be home, because I knew he was out of town. And I promptly got back to the house probably at 8 o'clock at night, and there was a little letter on the door saying that no one in the house was permitted to talk to the police. And in our line of work, we call that a clue. And there's that kind of sets something off in your mind.
And there's the headline.
Right. And there's something wrong. So when I knocked on the door, you know, naturally ignoring the letter, an attorney answered the door, and he said, what can I do for you? And I said, well, I would like to talk to the doctor about his wife. He said, well, he doesn't have anything to say, that you pretty much know in the report what happened. And I said, well, I'd really like to talk to him. He said, you can't talk to him. And I said, oh, okay. So that closed the door, and I went back to work. And the next few days, I spent more time, and eventually got to talk to Collier at school, and it just kind of went on its way and snowballed a little bit more. And the more information I got, the more it looked like there was something terribly wrong.
Okay. In that line of work, we call that a clue. That is just so good. So good. Tom, in 1990, at the News Journal, I was working there in the composing room, and you were our editor-in-chief. This was before the internet. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. I mean, the Mansfield News Journal was truly the eyes, ears, and voice of Mansfield. I'm hoping you can talk to us a little bit about how the city felt during that time. What, as your reporters were covering this, and as this was all sort of happening around us, what were the emotions that were running through the city that you saw, that you folks saw probably more accurately than maybe anyone at that point, besides perhaps Lieutenant Messmore and his colleagues?
Well, the story quickly became something that the entire community was focused on. As it started with a missing person report, and which we didn't pay that much attention to until we started getting calls from residents, many of them friends of Noreen, who candidly, Dave, were wondering whether the police department was going to follow up. They were raising questions that the police didn't seem to be moving fast enough. They were convinced this was not a disappearance, and they would tell us very directly that they thought Dr. Boyle had killed his wife, and they were unhappy with the police. So they wanted us to apply pressure. So we made calls, and of course, we're told that they'd give us stuff when they had it, which was the right answer. But there was a lot of interest, and it was growing interest of questioning the whole issue before Dave and his folks had even, been able to prove that that was the case. And then, of course, when the body was found and charges were filed, the feelings shifted a little bit, in that there were a fairly significant group of people in the community, many of them Dr. Boyle's patients, who were very loyal to him and believed his story and his denials, and that they were very vocal, and they were calling us, basically saying this can't be true. There's got to be some other explanation. This is all bogus. And of course, there was a neutral group of people who were just glued to this story. I mean, a murder mystery in town featuring a prominent physician that started with a missing person and ended up with a woman buried in a basement in Erie, Pennsylvania. I mean, it was like you couldn't make up a story like this. So the community was glued to this, and there were pockets of people who had views and opinions about it. During the trial, people fell in love with Collier. This young boy getting up there and telling a story like that and being brave enough to be able to do that at a young age, that was something, very, very, very significant. Something else that occurred during the trial that, caught our attention as it would. During a break in the trial, Dr. Boyle and his attorneys were in an office somewhere back behind the courtroom, and one of our photographers was kind of patrolling around and noticed the door open on the office where they were in, and Dr. Boyle was on his hands and knees peering out the door, looking around the corner like he was going to try to crawl away or make an escape. And so the photographer made eye contact with him, and rather than close the door and jump back, he just stayed there, and the photographer started taking pictures of him with his head sticking out the doorway. And we talked about that photo, and what does that photo say? And it may have said things that we didn't want to say. or it may have told the truth right there. I don't know. It was almost like he wasn't taking this seriously. But you know, the verdict, we anticipated the verdict. Unfortunately for us, it was going to occur in the afternoon. And of course, our paper came out in those days in the morning. So we planned to do a special extra edition, and took that day's paper and changed the front page and the back page of the front page with the results of the trial, and got it out on the street as quickly as we could. And that day we sold on our normal circulation was around 40,000, low 40s, and we sold an additional 10,000 papers that day, just based on that extra edition. We had a young man from our circulation department we had asked to go upstairs like in the old days where you have people hawking papers, extra, read all about it. Well, he never got off the curb in front of the News Journal. There was a line of traffic on 4th Street backed up with people. You know, we put some stuff on the radio to promote that we were doing it, and got it out into the stores as well, but people were just nonstop in front of the building buying the paper. It just captured the community in a way that no story, and I was there for 43 years, no story ever did like that. It was a human story. You know, sure, it was a murder mystery, but it was deeper than that. You know, it was about the truth. And so it was something that, you know, some folks are here who remember those days from the News Journal when we went through that process. And of course, everybody has their remembrances of this story. So before I shut up, I just want to congratulate this young man. I mean, courageous is the word. I don't know anybody. Dave Messmore and I agreed that we couldn't think of anybody that we know anywhere that would do what he did. It was very courageous.
This is my last question before we move to the audience. And Collier and Dr. Marikas, this question is for you together. There's this powerful moment in the film, Doctor, where you guide Collier, or it's my interpretation that you guide Collier to the reality that the closure he was seeking with his father was just simply not going to happen. The words that he wanted Dr. Boyle to say were never going to be said. That was not going to happen. And you seem to guide him towards accepting that was in fact the opportunity to move forward that he'd been looking for. So I did a little research. In 2016, there were 17,000 homicides in the United States and 45,000 suicides. If you run the math on that and you just simply look at immediate close family members, that's almost 250,000 people in the US alone that have been left behind. And this story to me, as I've watched it now twice, is about being left behind and what is left behind. And so I'm asking on behalf of all the loved ones, the friends of friends of those people that are impacted by violence, how can we help them heal? How can we help them move past impact and toward healing, as Collier, as you so powerfully have done with this really unique journey? But I'm thinking about the 250,000 people and what all of us potentially can learn from this, because frankly, some of those 17,000 and 45,000 are going to happen here.
Well, I think the most remarkable part of the process when we look at that is that it's the common human experience that everyone has experienced trauma. And part of experiencing trauma isn't to get over it or healing from it. It's accepting. I think I hate to say this to you, Collier, but I would say your father paid you the best potential for you healing. If he'd have told you exactly what happened, then you would have been back in the process of being drawn into saying, well, maybe he does love me. Maybe he will show me.
I completely agree with that.
And so when we realize that, the primary aspect of healing through this process of forgiveness, it isn't reconciling. I said that on the video, but it is more the process of being able to accept that this is part of who I am. And your mom's death is part of you. Your father's rejection and your eventual rejection of him is part of who you are today. That's what's given you the courage to do what you've done. And I truly believe that when we use the energy of such great challenges, such as trauma, Collier, just like you have, and use your gifts, which you have so many, to be able to manifest that in an effective way, you affect a lot of people's lives. So in some ways, he did you a favor by not telling you the truth, because it gave you your situation of choice that you had to make. And I think that's true with trauma across the board. We think if we just get the right answer, then we're done with the issue, but we're not, you see. If we just knew, if we just get the conviction in court, if we just get this information, it solves the problem, but it doesn't. Because it really is within you, Collier. Within you, you found yourself not in his admission, which I think you were hoping you would get, but his ability to create that same kind of confusion that he created in your life throughout. Does he love me or doesn't he? And you handled it that time by saying you found yourself. And in his rejection, you found yourself.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because it's something that I've toyed with my whole life. And this is going to sound strange, but there is a very significant amount of truth in it, and you see it in this film. Is sometimes that you have to just come to terms with staring at someone and accepting someone who tried to destroy your life and saved it at the exact same time. Because I'm who I am because of what has happened.
I think resilience occurs not when things go our way, but when we face those obstacles that create great difficulties for us. And learn not that you all control the effect, but I do. I think you found your resilience. You'll always be grieving about what's happened to you, but you found within yourself something more remarkable.
I mean, I found my resilience from that work, but also from everyone sitting in this room right now, and to have an amazing community force behind that, and to have the love and compassion of my mother that she taught me. It was a great gift. That's all I'm going to say.
Can we have a round of applause for these courageous and amazing panelists? Their wisdom and perspective has just opened up this film even more than it did initially. We are ready to take your questions now. There are mics over here to my left and over here to my right in the side aisles. If you have a question for anyone on the panel, please go ahead and line up at those mics, and we will just make sure that when you do that, please direct your question to the panelist you would like to take that question. Go right ahead.
Hi. My question's for Collier. Hi. You seem to have a beautiful relationship with your mother. How were you able to sit composed across from the man who took your mother's life, even though he was your dad? How did you keep it together?
The question is, how could I sit across from my father in the courtroom? Is that what you mean?
No, when you just met with him in the prison.
When in the film?
Yes.
Because I had been waiting, as I say in the film, a very long time to do that, to sit down and have that final confrontation with him and move on. And that was a golden opportunity. I mean, I had been plotting that in my head for 20 6 years sitting across from him. And the most indicative of why that was such a monumental situation is because when I open the dialogue with him, he comes in, he's very happy. Oh, because he thinks this is, my father thought this was going to be his showcase for the parole board. Well, it was, but he just didn't know what kind of showcase it was going to be. But he comes in very happy, and I have the small talk with him, and I say to him, one of the things that I've been interested in ever since you murdered my mother. And the camera, I believe, kind of trains back on him, and he becomes very uneasy. His whole body language completely changes. And then when I pull the letter out, which I had just waiting, that was how I handled that. That's what I went in for. Thank you.
Can
Yeah, Dennis, please.
I just
Go right ahead. We've got one over here to my right.
No, Dennis, please.
No, I just want to mention
sorry.
real quickly, I thought it was really well done. This is what in my business, we call drawing the person with resistance, and that's what you did. Very good. Because what you said is, this is where you murdered my mother. And he said, no, I didn't murder her there. So he denied the location, but not the event. I thought that was really very striking.
Well, that's what sociopaths do. Oh, you didn't get that one particular fact right. No, I didn't hit her. I was not driving a Lexus. It was a Mercedes. But I still ran him over.
Go right ahead.
This is for Collier. Why were you unable to attend your mother's funeral?
I was unable to attend the funeral. So there was a memorial service that was done here in town, but because of the nature of the case, my mother's and my mother's family had taken possession of the body. I mean, and Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. And because I was going to most likely be a witness, having known what I had known, I was not allowed to do that because that would have corrupted me, or I would have, been more of a volatile witness or whatever. It's just not how things are done in law enforcement. Please, Dave, expound upon that.
Well, we had some period of time where we spent some time with Collier before the trial, and sometimes that's frowned upon by the prosecution and the defense, but Collier was in the position of being rejected by not only his father's side but his mother's side of the family because of the stuff that Jack had done to their daughters, and they were afraid to have Collier around. So he was in a pretty unique position, and it was very difficult for him. And we spent some time with him trying to help him through this and make things a little bit better for him, and kind of occupy his time a little bit. So, but it was difficult for him to be around us for any long period of time with the trial coming up. So we kind of lost a little bit of track with him until the trial happened.
Well, Collier, I don't know if you remember me. You probably don't, but my son Mike Benjamin went to Discovery School with you in kindergarten, and I knew your mother, and I'm an RN, and I worked with your father every day at People's Hospital. And during that time, when all these events took place, I was frantic. I would call all day long his office to see. You may not have ever known any of this. That's why I'm sharing this with you. But we'd call his office, and they'd be like, well, he'll be here pretty soon. And it would go day after day. And his patients had had surgery. They needed to go home. They needed their medicine ordered. There was no doctor, and we talked to the director of nursing, and she said, well, you just got to pacify these patients because he'll be in, he'll be in. And that's one little factor. So it's very, very stressful for those of us that took care of his patients during that time. The other thing was...
Well, first of all, thank you for doing that for the people that were dependent upon his medical care.
And honestly, he was a very excellent doctor. I worked with him every day. I worked with lots of doctors. He was good to his patients. He was a good doctor. And the other thing I wanted to share with you, I don't know if, it's a little hard for me to talk about this, but your mother, one day we were waiting for you and Mike to get out of school, and I was sitting with your mother, and she was upset because she lost this bracelet that she said it was in her family or, some special bracelet. Well, a couple months went by, and I kind of forgot about it. And your father was having an affair with this nurse I worked with, and I saw that bracelet on the nurse's wrist. And I thought, I can't say anything to anybody about it. Well, I'm saying it to the whole world now.
Yeah, cat's out of the bag now.
Yeah.
It's out now.
Yeah, so anyway, I just thought I'd like to share those things with you. I didn't know if you knew any of that, but I wanted to let you know your father was a good doctor. Patients admired him greatly. And, that what a difficult time that was for all of us staff then. So.
Thank you for having the courage to share that. Thank you.
Hi, Collier. I just want to also say that your father was a good physician. He took care of my aunt when she had a stroke, and her doctor was away on vacation, and he was an excellent communicator and did a good job while she was in the Mansfield hospital. I just had a two-part question for you. I was wondering if you could share more about your relationship with your grandparents on your mother's side and your father's side. And the other part of my question is with Sherry, you have a half-sibling, I believe. And do you have any contact with your half-sibling and her children?
I'll take the first part of that question because it's easier to answer.
Okay.
And then we'll go on the second one. So both of my mother's parents were deceased, and my father's father was deceased before the murder. Only my grandmother was alive, my father's mother, who, was in complete disbelief that this could ever, she just didn't believe it. That's, she put her house up for my father's trial and legal fees, and, she just didn't believe that. So the strange thing about that situation is that she treated my mother like a daughter. My mother and her would go shopping together, and they were like sisters. It's not even like a daughter, like they were like sisters. So her behavior changed overnight, and it was very strange. And she was obviously protecting her son, which, not everybody, that's not a mother's ambition to have her son turn out to be this horrible human being that commits this violent act. She just knew that she loved her son and couldn't believe that he could do something. The second part is I have been very privileged, and it was something that George and Susan were very adamant about from day one. They reached out to Sherry, and they wanted me to have a relationship with Chrissy. And she's grown into a very fine young woman. She's a nurse, and she has a beautiful son. Our relationship is troubling. I'm sorry, it's not troubling. There are certain situations that are trying on relationships, and when you set out to make a movie about your life and the consequences of it, and the impacts, and that involves her mother and involves her some way, and all of these people in this town, it puts very significant strain on those relationships. So we have had a relationship. We are beginning to reignite that relationship and communication. And I love her to death. She is my half-sister, but I love her wholly. And I hope that relationship strengthens and that she understands why I had to do what I had to do to make this film.
I've got something to add there.
They'll do it. Just start talking.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. No, because Jay, you asked earlier how we got people to open up, and the fact is that, and you two can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the original vision for this film was somewhat different in that it wasn't going to be so Collier solo-centric. It was going to be, Collier's experience was this. Well, what was his adopted sister's experience, and what was his half-sister's experience, and what was his uncle on his dad's side, and so on and so forth. There were a lot of people affected, and as George said, one by one, it just kind of felt like that door kept kind of closing until it really became very centered on Collier, and I was, one thing I learned from Collier and his approach to trauma was the line that you said, Collier, in the car, where you kind of said, some people just do not want to go here at all. And I think that's maybe one of the things that's underexplored about why trauma connected to violent crime, why a lot of times people don't heal even after decades, is because it's so ugly to try to go back there that nobody wants to confront it. And, to your credit, you took a very different approach, and it seemed to have a very healing outcome for you.
Yeah, can I just add to that, or is that
Absolutely,
okay?
yeah.
Okay. In doing this film, I just felt that Collier's story was going to reach out to so many people, and that it would have a really human effect. And if you could really get deep into his soul and deep into the people who he loved and the people in the community that cared about him, it would start to open up, and it would start to be healing for everybody who spoke. And I firmly believe that that's what happened, because as filmmakers, we're never trying to get any more than you want to give us. And when you give us material and understanding, it just goes a long way to help everybody.
Thank you. Right over here.
Hi, I have a statement first, but there'll be a question at the end, I promise. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for their involvement in this film. I've noticed that there is a focus in the media on how salacious crimes are, and even in the film, we saw the people who were watching in the courtroom talk about how it's a soap opera, it's like a movie, and not connect to the fact that these are real people that are really affected. And so thank you for that. And you had mentioned that you were, Collier, you had mentioned that you were interested in doing a TV show. Are you still, after this journey, interested in making this a series, seeing if it can help more people?
Well, initially it had a sort of a different, we were going to examine more cases, but the next thing that I really want to do is take exactly what was done with myself and do it with others and help others go through and navigate through trauma. And I wanted to help Sherpa them with the help of psychologists and community and loved ones to do that. So yeah, I would absolutely love to do that.
I have two questions, please. One for Collier and one for Mr. Messmore. For Collier, do you see any chance of a relationship with your dad when he gets out of prison?
When or if?
I would like it to be if.
My mother had this saying, and she used to coin every once in a while, and she used to say, "It's going to be a cold day in hell
right
before
on.
that ever happens." No.
Can I comment?
But-
Can I think as we look at that in terms of relationship, Collier, you'll always have a relationship with your father. The challenge is he was in control of you seeking him. Your healing came when you decided to say, I need to let go. But that relationship is part of you. I just think it's a different shift that you control, which is just a relieving feeling.
Absolutely.
Like you said.
Absolutely.
For Mr. Messmore, why was Sherry not prosecuted or anything done with her being involved in this?
Well, there were a number of other people involved in this that could have been suspects. When you actually have committed a crime, then somebody should prosecute you. There was somewhat of a crime committed when she signed the purchase agreement, and then her uncle notarized it as if it were Noreen Boyle. And for that, why they were not, I don't know, other than the entire case for murder was so much more important. And that's always a question. There are cases that we had that minor crimes that were committed were not prosecuted for a variety of reasons, and that's something the prosecutor had to make a decision on, not the police. But
Good luck to you, Collier.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Over here.
All right, Collier, since you made this movie, have you got in contact with Elizabeth at all?
Have you talked to Elizabeth at all since you've made the film?
No, I mean, I think Barbara, we were in Toronto. We tried to call her because we're in a different country, in a foreign country, so might disguise our number. And then we tried again recently when we were at another film festival. No, I mean I've tried to. It was hot. Yeah, in Toronto. Yeah. No, I mean I've tried to reach out to her. I haven't heard anything from her.
And also, my daughter wants to know if you can sing still.
What?
Can you still sing?
My daughter wants to
I can
know.
still sing. I can still sing.
You're gonna sing right now. Young man over here.
Hi. I had a question that was probably best suited for Collier. In your personal opinion, do you believe your father regrets what he did?
First of all, thank you for being such a young man asking such a big question. I mean, that really comes with a lot of thought, and I commend you for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think that's kind of a two-part question for both myself and Dennis. I think that my answer to that, and then Dennis can comment with his expert opinion, but I don't feel that my father is capable of feeling regret. I don't think he has the tools, but I could be mistaken. But I think that's one of the characteristics of a sociopath is that they're just not capable.
Say something? The American Psychological Association warns psychologists not to diagnose somebody when you've never worked with them. I've worked with them on a professional basis. But persons with the characteristic pattern of Dr. Boyle would suggest that one of the key variables that are missing is the ability to incorporate conscience, the ability to discern right and wrong effectively. And so he is able to the degree that he got caught doing the activity that he was doing. I'm not diagnosing him, please understand that. And the degree that the environment that he's in controls his environment. So he's regretful that he got caught.
Yeah, that's for sure, absolutely.
Dave, if you want to weigh in on this, please do.
That's an interesting thing. We had two situations with Collier. The first one, I think, when his dad came down the hallway and looked in his room, Collier told me he was terrified, and I sincerely think he was. I think his father might have done something to him if he thought Collier had been a witness. The other time was when he knew he was being investigated, and he told Collier that it would be nice if they took a trip down to Florida together during the investigation. And that really upset me. And I called Children's Services. We had a big meeting about it. And I got him removed from the home, away from his dad, because Jack Boyle has no conscience. I had two ex-Marines that worked for me in my unit, and they both told me how great he was. He was a Navy pilot. He'd been shot down in Vietnam. Stories went on and on about him, and yet, as these folks were talking about, he made a good impression on them as he treated them. But he had a split personality, and I think he is very devious, in my opinion.
Dave, wasn't some of those stories about his military career, weren't they false?
Yeah, I did some research on that, and I actually, in one hearing, his brother, his brother was in the Navy as a civilian, and he was in the most important secret part of the submarine program for the Navy in the Pentagon. And he had the nerve to come down here and get up in court and start talking about how he had talked to Noreen just before she died, and that she told him that she had a relationship with me. Now, you know, and I could have come out of the chair and strangled him, but I didn't have to, because Judge DeWeese came up out of his chair, and he told him, he said, "One more word out of your mouth and you're going down to the county jail. You know, don't you ever say anything like that again." Well, he sat down and shut up. So that caused me to call the United States Navy Investigative Services, and they came down from the Pentagon, and they took away his Secret Service clearance for about a month or a month and a half. They said that's about as long as they could do, but they put it in his file and made sure that was noted, that he was doing something like that, and I think that runs in that family.
Ray?
I just want to make sure nobody missed that. So Captain Messmore was the one who got young Collier and Elizabeth put into protective services. He was also the one who pushed to see the Erie house searched and resulted in the body coming out.
I want to clarify one thing, Dave, that you just said. It doesn't run in all the family.
Over here?
I was actually kind of hesitant to come down here. I know your father. I served at Marion Correctional as a corrections officer for 20 years. When I heard him ask that question, I had to come down. Your father, I know him so well that I was his lock officer for so many years. I was an STG gang investigator for so many years. I knew him as he was the clerk for the chaplain's office, and I had several conversations with him. And one of the conversations was right before he went to the parole board hearing in 2010. And to that date, he still denied that he did anything to her. When I was a case manager, can you hear me all right?
If you can pick up the mic, it'll probably be a little easier.
Yeah, it's a little short.
Because I think I want to hear this.
All right. So like I was saying, I was working for the Department of Corrections for 20 years. I knew your dad very well since 1998. I was his lock officer for a while. I was his case manager for a while. And I was an investigator, gang investigator for the institution for a while too. And like I was saying, just before he went in for his first parole hearing in 2010, he still denied that anything happened. I mean, we had a private conversation about it and everything. He was actually asking me what he could do, what he should say. And I said, tell him the truth. Just tell the truth. And he couldn't even tell me the truth. And interesting enough is that a couple years later, I was his case manager, his temporary case manager. And we were sitting in an office talking one day, and we had a discussion again. And it came up. And he denied it again. And it's funny is because since I was case manager, I had the information right in front of me from his parole hearing where he actually admitted to it. But he still denied it to me. So he still had that, well, when I saw him, when you asked him whether or not he did it, and when he said something, whatever his answer was, I knew right then he was lying. And I was so proud of you when you called him on his bullshit. Because I know him. So anyway, interesting enough is that I was compelled to come here because I've known your dad for so long. And I don't have any questions for you, but if you have any questions for me, feel free. All right?
I'll see you after the show.
I think they're going to exchange numbers. Sir?
Yeah, my name's Brian Thompson. Collier, I live in the house 2 doors over from you, and I guess the name of the game here is like, let's confuse the little kid. your dad telling his stories. He was talking to one of the staff at People's Hospital earlier, and she explained to me that your dad had a lot of pictures of the SEALs, Navy SEALs, on the wall there. And I said, well, he was telling us that he was the flight surgeon for the Blue Angels.
Yep.
Is that both of them, or is that? But anyway, I kind of contributed to your confusion, because one day in our garage, I was standing there with my two nieces, and you'd come over and play with them some. I don't know if you remember this or not, but I had a magic trick, and you wanted to know how I did it, and I didn't tell you.
I remember this.
Now, since this is kind of Noreen's memorial here, and by golly, she showed up and said, show them how you do the damn trick.
This just keeps getting better and better and better. Go right ahead.
Hi, this question is for Collier. Do you believe if Shelley did not get pregnant, your mom might still be alive? Sherry, sorry.
If Sherry did not get pregnant, my mother would have still been alive. I got to be honest with you, and I'm glad that Dr. Merkis is here. I don't even know if that's something I want to hypothesize over. I will say that I don't want to hypothesize over, because that would make me regret the fact that I have a sister, half-sister in this world. But what I would say is that I do somewhat regret. No, you know what? I don't have any regrets. I don't.
There it is.
Life's too short.
Go ahead.
Okay, I have two more questions. The first one, I don't really know who's best to answer this, so whoever. How did you end up with the Zieglers? Like, why was it better for you to be with a family you didn't know versus, like, your mom's best friend, or, like, I'm sorry, I don't remember the lead detective's name, but rather than him, or...
Detective Messmore.
Yeah, Detective Messmore, or something like that. And are you glad that obviously, I guess you're glad you met the Zieglers. I don't know how to say your name, I'm sorry. Yeah, Ziegler,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I think we answered both those questions in the film, but just to reiterate, when something like this happens, it's not, a committee sits down and says, well, he's better off here. No, it's a judge that makes a decision. And sometimes those judges, they always have a reason why they make those decisions. And it was handed down that I went to the Zieglers. And as far as our relationship is wonderful. I mean, as I say in the film, as disappointed as I was to not go to the Messmores, I still ended up in a really great home. I got pretty lucky. Let's just be honest, So,
Did you have one more question?
Yeah, was it ever ascertained whether Sherry knew about / was in on the murder or not?
The question is, was it ever ascertained that Sherry knew about or was somehow complicit in Noreen's killing? And can you talk about that, Dave? Because you would be the guy that would know.
Well, had she been, she'd be locked up. And I don't know. There's always loose ends somewhere that you can't always tie up. She may have had some information, some hint, but we never had any solid proof of that. So that's just speculation, really.
Well, with that, I want to thank again all of you and our amazing panelists that have given so much of their time. Collier?
I don't want to leave on that note. Just to be really clear. So again, I want to just say thank you to the Renaissance, to Richland Source, to everyone here up on this stage. I want to say thank you to all of you for really being here and supporting this, because that's what this is about. This is not a retrial of the case. This is not a whodunit. This is moving on and examining the consequences of violence and how trauma affects people, and it is about healing, and it is about moving on with your life. And on that note, Jay's going to take us out.
Well, there's nothing to follow that. Let's give these guys a huge round of applause. You welcomed them to Mansfield 2.5 hours ago. Let's say goodbye in the same way. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being part of our night tonight. Thank you to all of our panelists, for Collier, Detective Messmore, Mr. and Mrs. Ziegler, Barbara, Ray, Tom, Dennis. This has been a fantastic evening. It was exactly the evening we had hoped it would be, Collier. And thank you guys so much. Goodbye and have a great night. Thank you, Mansfield.